Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my Right Honourable friend's statement today, particularly in regard to the public sector pay award. But I wonder if she could share a little bit more in terms of how the appalling economic conditions that we now face, how should we incorporate equity in her decisions about how we're going to address this in-year deficit?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. I've got to be honest, the decisions that I've made today are tough decisions. They're not the decisions that I wanted to make. They're not the decisions I expected to make. But given the seriousness of the inheritance that I face, they are the right decisions in those circumstances, the responsible decisions in those circumstances, and the fairest decisions that I could make with these circumstances.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Under the Conservatives, the new hospital programme legacy is completely dire, but the Chancellor will know that there is also a cost to delay. We have life-expired buildings that will need to continue to be patched up before they are replaced. So could I urge the Chancellor, as I urged her colleague, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care last week, to give the go-ahead to those projects that are ready to go but are currently living with life-expired buildings? And will she review the outdated rules to allow hospitals to spend some more of their own capital funds to help with repairs and rebuilds?
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable lady for that question, and I welcome the Deputy Speaker to her place. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will meet with people affected. In Leeds, we were promised a new hospital that has never been built, so I do understand the concerns the honourable and right honourable members have about this hospital programme. But we are in a situation where there's a £22 billion in-year overspend. That means incredibly difficult decisions. These are not the decisions that we want to make, but they're responsible ones in the circumstances, given the dire inheritance that we face from the party opposite.
Jeevan Sander.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. Work in the Treasury. What we've heard today about the party opposite is shocking and it's shameful. Can I also say the Chancellor today set out how far away the last government was from meeting their own targets on hospital building? Will the Chancellor agree with me that our plan, by contrast, represents a deliverable way to make sure that we get waiting lists down?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he's very welcome on these benches with his expertise. Everything in our manifesto was fully costed and fully funded. 40,000 additional appointments every single week in the NHS, funded by cracking down on tax avoidance and ensuring that if you make your home in Britain, you should pay your taxes here, which is why we will finally deal with a terrible situation where non-DOMs could claim they didn't live in Britain for tax purposes despite making their homes here. Those people should contribute to the public purse, and under Labour, they will.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Congratulations on your election, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can't hope to match the splendid double entendre of the Honourable Lady for Walthamstow, but may I say to the Chancellor that one effect of being here a long time is a realisation that no one party has a monopoly of wisdom. Is she willing at least to concede, given the impartial assessment by the House of Commons Library that COVID cost this country between 310 and 410 billion pounds, that the previous government did a pretty good job in getting inflation down to 2% less than 2 years after the pandemic?
The pandemic is no excuse for making unfunded spending commitments, and that is precisely what the government did. And given that the honourable gentleman mentioned the pandemic, during the pandemic, the party opposite handed out contracts to friends and donors of their party in a VIP lane, which is why we are appointing a COVID corruption commissioner, because we want that money back in our public services where it belongs.
Bill Esterson.
Well, welcome to your place, Madam Deputy Speaker. It wasn't just the public finances which the party opposite mismanaged over 14 years. They failed to support industry too. And just the figures today demonstrate this point. Britain has dropped out of the top 10 countries for manufacturing for the first time since the Industrial Revolution. So I very much welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to leverage in billions more in private investment to make up for the record low levels of private investment that we saw under the party opposite. And does she agree with me that these latest manufacturing figures just show how critical it is that government works closely with business and the trade unions on a long-term industrial strategy.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I too saw those numbers today that showed that Britain was out of the top 10 of manufacturing countries, which is shameful given our history and being at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. I'd also like to pay tribute to my honourable friend for the work that he's done in ensuring that Labour went into this election as the most pro-business party at this election. The reforms that we've already announced in the first 3 weeks, planning reforms, the creation of a national wealth fund, reform of our pension system and a modern industrial strategy, are how we will go about making Britain the best place to start and grow a business and the best place to invest. And we look forward to holding our International Investment Summit in the UK later this year.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have sympathy for the issues that the Chancellor is seeking to address, but the solutions she set out today are focused on spending cuts. Please could she say more about how she is also looking at opportunities to bring in revenue to the Exchequer so that we can see the investment that's needed, whether that's in new hospitals or whether that's in investing in our railways. In particular, we do need new hospitals. We have hospitals that are crumbling around the country, as we all know. We need to invest in our railways. We have people stuck in traffic jams and struggling with high rail fares. So in particular, has the Chancellor looked at the potential to introduce a wealth tax, a tax on the very wealthiest in society, people with wealth and assets over 10 million, which could raise tens of billions during this Parliament? Has the Chancellor considered proposals like this, which would address the fact that we have growing billionaire wealth, but ordinary people are suffering from these cuts?
Chancellor, thank you.
Thank the honourable gentleman for that question. I just set out the non-dom tax loophole closures, and my honourable friend, the Exchequer Secretary, has published a written ministerial statement today setting out the manifesto commitments we made around the energy profits levy, VAT on private schools, as well as the non-dom changes which we will be consulting on and introducing in the budget. But we will not be introducing a wealth tax. We want this to be a great place for investors to come, and a wealth tax would have the opposite effect.
Claire Hazelgrove.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I thank my right honourable friend for her transparency and openness about the dire state of our inheritance from the Conservatives. Now, with the Tory leadership race now clearly in full swing, which is important, people across the Filton and Bradley Stoke constituency and across the country deserve to know. Why is it that none of the contenders came clean about this black hole when they were in government? Or were they kept in the dark by the Chancellor's predecessor as well?
Well, it's far from me to give advice to Tory leadership contestants, but if I was taking part in this contest, I would want to distance myself as much as possible from the government in the previous Parliament that caused this terrible mess.
Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor committed to long-term planning for capital expenditure. Last March, the then-Chancellor committed £20 billion to carbon capture, utilisation and storage, without which a net zero future cannot be delivered. Can she set out to the House today, in light of her review, what commitment this government will make to investment, including that £20 billion, into carbon capture, utilisation and storage?
Chancellor.
Well, we've already created a national wealth fund which will leverage in billions of pounds private sector investment, including into carbon capture and storage, as well as green hydrogen and renewable ready ports. But we'll be setting out all of our spending in the spending review later this year.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulations on your appointment. It also feels really good to be back on this side of the House. Chancellor, the annual accounts for the Department of Health and Social Department showed that there was £9.9 billion spent on PPE has been written off. Does the Chancellor agree that we could claw back this money through the COVID Corruption Commissioner? And we could possibly use some of that money to eradicate child poverty?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. It is a source of huge shame that the previous government wears for spending billions of pounds of taxpayers' money on contracts in a VIP lane and on PPE that was never used, and in some cases has literally gone up in smoke and been burnt. That's why we are appointing a COVID corruption commissioner, because that money belongs not in the pockets of Tory donors, but in our public services, and we will do everything within our powers to get that money back.
Ben Obsijekti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, the Health Secretary stated that hospitals with reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete are at the top of my list of priorities. If the new hospitals programme is delayed via review, that means along with it will be the rebuild of the 5 RAC hospitals, not part of the 40 referenced. Without avoiding the question with a soundbite, what reassurances can the Chancellor give that we will break ground on any of the new RAC replacement hospitals, and specifically Hinchinbrook Hospital in my constituency of Huntingdon, during this Parliament?
Chancellor.
Well, the honourable gentleman should blame the previous government for not funding commitments that they made. But my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will meet all people affected, including those affected by hospitals with RAC problems, as soon as possible, because I personally recognise as a Leeds MP, the importance of new hospitals and ensuring that our hospital estate is fit for purpose. But we cannot spend money that we don't have.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Shadow Chancellor said the books were open and the Office for Budget Responsibility had audited the government's figures shortly before the election. However, the chair of the OBR has today published a letter confirming he intends to launch a review into the preparation of the March forecasts, and that we were made aware of the extent of these pressures at a meeting with the Treasury only last week. Perhaps the Chancellor, perhaps I'm only new here, Madam Deputy Speaker, can inform me how to get the Shadow Chancellor to correct the record.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. The OBR have just published a letter where, as my honourable friend said, that letter says, we were made aware of the extent of these pressures at a meeting with the Treasury last week. He goes on to say, if a significant fraction of these pressures is ultimately accommodated through higher DEL spending in 24-25, this would constitute one of the largest year-ahead overspends against DEL forecasts outside the pandemic years. This is incredibly serious, and it's why today I came to this House to set out the £22 billion overspend compared with what the government set out at its previous budget. I think that this letter from the Chair of the Office for Budget Responsibility can leave no one in this chamber under any doubt about the seriousness of the situation.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. And can I thank the Chancellor for her candour and her clarity today. There will be many residents and patients at Frimley Park Hospital in my constituency today who are surrounded by a forest of acroprops holding up RAC-riddled roofs, who will be deeply anxious at the Chancellor's announcement today. Can she recommit herself to the Secretary of State for Health's commitment last week to prioritise spending, where possible, on those RAC-affected hospitals? And to bring some comfort and clarity to the patients and indeed the staff at Frimley Park Hospital. Thank you very much.
Chancellor.
I fully understand the concerns of the right honourable gentleman, and I know that during the election campaign, like so many members across the House, he would have campaigned in good faith, believing that the money was there. I can say in all candour today, the money was not there for this hospital programme, and I apologise, although it's not my apology to make, on behalf of the party opposite, for the state of the public finances that they have left for us to sort out. But my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will meet with you and everybody affected by this so that we can do whatever we can to make sure that we can get these hospitals in the condition that your constituents, and so many of our constituents, rightly expect.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Chancellor confirm that despite the Conservatives' failure to set aside money for their transport commitments, Labour's plan to modernise our transport network, vital for my community in East Thanet, will deliver a unified rail system, which means we can deliver more for passengers and for local communities?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. And we had to make difficult decisions today to cancel road and rail infrastructure projects. These aren't decisions that we wanted to make. But if the money isn't there, we can't go ahead with these projects. It's as simple as that. The money has got to be there. The sums have always got to be add up, because I will not make the mistakes of the previous government and of Liz Truss in crashing the economy, sending interest rates and mortgage rates spiralling for our constituents. That's why I've had to take the action that I've taken today, to get a grip on public spending, to get a grip on public finances. I make no apology for that, but I do recognise the damage that it does to so many constituents with projects that they had expected to be happening.
Sir Desmond Swain.
When her legislation enables illegal entrants to leave their current accommodation, where will they go?
Chancellor.
Well, under the previous government, no applications were being processed, and so nobody was being sent home. We will process those applications, and we will send people who have no right to be here back home.
Fred Thomas. Apologies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, for her excellent statement, putting public finances and public services back on their feet. Does she agree, however, with me that after seeing how extensive this Tory cover-up has been, with unfunded commitments in multiple departments, it's not just her predecessor as Chancellor, but every member of the last cabinet that is complicit in this cover-up?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I don't believe that there's any member of the previous cabinet who could not have been aware about the scale of this cover-up and the scale of this overspending. They should hang their heads in shame, and instead of coming to this chamber today and issuing platitudes, they should have done the right thing and apologised to the country.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor this afternoon has made two key political decisions. One, to fund extraordinarily high public sector pay increases, and two, to clobber pensioners to pay for it. So can she explain to this House and every pensioner that will lose their winter fuel allowance in the process why it was she didn't challenge the Bank of England on the taxpayer bailouts they require to the tune of tens of billions of pounds to cover their losses from bond sales?
Thank the honourable gentleman for that question. First of all, on the pay review bodies, it's an extraordinary omission that the previous government did not set affordability criteria for the independent pay review bodies, which meant that they were able to come back with these recommendations. And it would be almost without precedent that we wouldn't accept recommendations from an independent pay review body. And if he wants to go to the doctors, the nurses, the teachers, the police officers, those in the armed forces in his constituency, and say that they don't deserve a pay increase in line with private sector wages, then that's up to him to say. But I do believe that those public sector workers deserve those pay increases. On pensions and the winter fuel payment, this is not the decision I wanted to make. It's not the decision I expected to make. But we had to make in-year savings, which is incredibly difficult to do. But without doing that, we would put in our public finances at risk. We are ensuring that everybody who's entitled to pension credit, the poorest pensioners, continue to get the winter fuel payment, and indeed we will work with the Department for Work and Pensions, with local authorities and with charities to boost the take-up of pension credit.
Rachel Maskell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and welcome to your place. Can I thank my right honourable friend for her forensic approach to looking at the nation's finances. As she digs deeper, she will see that York, the city I represent, is at the bottom of many of the matrix for the funding formulas. Will she, by the budget, look at the funding formulas so we can see the distribution of funding? The last government handed out for pet projects much of the money that she is trying to get control of now, but will she look at how that's distributed across the country too?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. I know particularly around flood defences, there are many great needs in the constituency of York that she represents. These decisions, though, will all be made at the time of the spending review.
Josh Babarindi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Residents of Eastbourne will be outraged to learn that the Conservatives' promise of a brand new hospital for our town was not worth the paper it was written on. Eastbourne deserves better. Now, underinvestment has consequences, and at the moment, Eastbourne District General Hospital is closed for births due to this underinvestment, and it has been since December. It needs investment, so will the Chancellor confirm that her government will invest in midwives, doctors and nurses, as well as hospital buildings, to protect local services there and across the country?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question, and I can see on behalf of his constituents the frustration and anger that he feels that the previous government have let his constituents so badly down by not funding these hospitals that they promised. I can commit that my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will meet with everybody affected by this, but we have also got a workforce plan to invest in the future workforce in our National Health Service, as well as today announcing that we are accepting in full the recommendations of the independent pay review bodies to pay our doctors, nurses and others who work in our NHS properly.
Torsten Bell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulations on your new post. There can be reasonable political debates across this House about the total levels of public spending. There was lots of that in the last election, with us calling for higher levels of public investment, but there should be complete agreement across this House about the need for the Treasury to ensure public spending is well spent. And top is that is making sure that policies and commitments of every department match the budgets of those departments. And what you can hear from experts right around the country today is that they do not match those budgets. So can the Chancellor reassure this ex-Treasury official, this House and my constituents in Swansea that this will never happen under his Labour government?
I thank my honourable friend for that question and welcome him to his place in this House, and he speaks powerfully based on his previous experience. I will fix the mess that we have inherited, but it is a terrible mess, a £22 billion in-year gap between what was forecast to be spent and what was actually being spent by the previous government. We will get a grip on our public finances. That requires tough choices, but that is the role of Chancellor and that is the role of government. These are choices that the previous government ducked and diverted, but we will make the difficult decisions to get our public finances back on a firmer footing.
Now we could do with some masterclasses in short questions and short answers. Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor quoted Paul Johnson earlier of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, but she actually omitted the end of his comments. He said half the spending hole, she claims, is public sector pay, over which the government made a choice. That's the truth, isn't it? She does a good shocked face, but she chose to do this, to create her own spending hole, didn't she?
Well done. It was the previous government that set the mandate for the pay review bodies, and it is extraordinary that they didn't include in that remit a measure of affordability, but they didn't, which is why the pay review bodies made these recommendations. The previous Education Secretary could have rejected these recommendations, but she let it sit on her desk because the previous government were not willing to make tough decisions. We've made those decisions, including making sure that a third of the cost of these pay awards is absorbed, but there's a cost to inaction. £1.7 billion cost to the NHS alone last year because of industrial action.
Derek Twigg.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Chancellor, I'll say to the Chancellor, we do know under the previous government that there was at least a £17 billion black hole in defence, and of course they'd hollowed out the armed forces. But can I ask her, what is a surprise today is that we find out that there was not enough money set aside in reserve to fund all the military assistance needed for Ukraine. Could you say a bit more about that?
I think the problem that the previous government got into is that every time they wanted to make a commitment, they said it would be paid for from the reserve. The problem is that by the time I came into the Treasury on the 5th of July, that reserve had been spent 3 times over because they put so many commitments into that reserve that they couldn't afford them. That is the situation that we inherited. That's where the £22 billion black hole comes from, and that's why I'm having to make difficult decisions today to get a grip on the public finances.
Paul Holmes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor spent the election campaign saying she was going for growth through investing in infrastructure, but instead she's cutting it and now funding inflation-busting pay deals and scrapping pension benefits for the worst off. Does she agree that in the battle for the two faces of the Labour Party, the face of tax rises, borrowing and boom and bust won, and the British people, ultimately hard-working people, will lose under her leadership?
There's nothing pro-growth about making unfunded spending commitments. There's nothing pro-growth about a lack of respect for taxpayers' money. On the issue of pension credit and the winter fuel payment, we will continue to provide winter fuel payment for the poorest pensioners, those in receipt of pension credit.
Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Chancellor for her statement today and being straight with the public about the state of our finances. I know my constituents in the Livingston constituency want a government that tells it to them straight. Will she agree with me that ducking tough decisions and hiding bad news, as the party opposite has done, is just a way to make a bad situation even worse?
The previous government and the previous Chancellor should hang their heads in shame of the inheritance that they have left for this government to fix. But I will fix this mess. I will put our public finances and our public spending on a firmer footing. That is the responsible thing to do, and that is what I will do.
Pete Wishart.
Welcome to the chair, Madam Deputy Speaker. Everybody and their granny knew that there would be a multi-billion-pound black hole. Only the Chancellor seemed to be deaf and blind to the situation, but we knew she was going to be here explaining the sheer scale of it. When we raised this during the election campaign, we were told we were being misleading, that this was all mince. Well, we know now. And isn't it the case that cutting winter fuel payments to all pensioners seems and feels like Tory austerity? And what discussions has she had? What discussions has she had with the Scottish Government? Because she will know, obviously, that this is a devolved responsibility. You're here.
My right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, briefed the Scottish Government today on these decisions. These are decisions that are necessary, and it is not in the interests of the Scottish people to have unfunded commitments and put our public finances and our reputation for economic stability at risk. These are not easy decisions, these are difficult decisions, but the fault of these decisions lies with the previous government. And to claim that this is austerity today, when we have just given a pay rise to more than 2 million public sector workers, it doesn't know what he's talking about.
Katie White.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for her clarity and candour. After 14 years of sluggish growth, low living standards and then a cost of living crisis, how callous is it that the Tories went into the election asking for another 5 years of power with a manifesto of false hope, undeliverable promises, with no mentions of the numerous black holes she's now uncovered? What will the Chancellor do to instead offer my constituents of Leeds North West some real hope?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and very pleased to have her as a constituency neighbour in Leeds. My honourable friend is absolutely right. The government went into the election, the previous government went into the election knowing that there was a £22 billion black hole. And what did they do during that election? They made more unfunded spending commitments. They made more unfunded promises about tax that they knew they could not keep. That is deeply irresponsible. And after all the damage they've done, they should have come to this chamber today and apologised.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Chancellor confirm that all of the information presented today was not known to her before last Thursday when the estimates were laid? Thank you.
When I arrived at the Treasury 3 weeks ago, I asked Treasury officials to do a full analysis. We concluded that analysis over this weekend, and I am publishing it today to this House of Commons.
Natasha Irons.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Chancellor for this urgent update today. With living standards now worse than they were when they took office, people across this country continue to suffer the consequences of broken promises and mismanagement from the previous government. But this final fiscal mic drop truly is shocking. Does the Chancellor agree that, in contrast to the unfunded fantasy promises put forward by the party opposite, Labour's manifesto showed cast iron discipline and in being fully costed?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. Everything in Labour's manifesto was fully costed and fully funded. We now know that on top of the £22 billion black hole that the previous government left, they made unfunded commitments during the election. That was deeply irresponsible, and the country were right to reject them.
Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Chancellor think that one of her first decisions to cancel infrastructure projects is consistent with her desire to grow the economy?
There's nothing pro-growth about making commitments that you cannot afford. There is nothing pro-growth about having £22 billion of unfunded commitments. We saw that when Liz Truss did her mini-budget less than 2 years ago. And right honourable and honourable members on the benches opposite would do well to learn that lesson.
Clive Lewis.
Excuse me. Oh, sorry, thank you. And welcome to your place, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, probably won't be too surprised to hear that when it comes to wasteful and expensive vanity projects, the party opposite hasn't confined itself to national matters. Conservative-run Norfolk County Council was attempting to push through a £300 million vanity road known as the Norwich Western Link. That's 3.9 kilometres of road at a cost of more than £70 million a kilometre. So will she take a look at this environmental and financial disaster and work with those of us who know there are more cost-effective and ecologically sound alternatives?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue, and I will ask my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, to meet with him to discuss them further.
Ben Lake.
The Chancellor's clarity on the state of the public finances, and indeed for confirming that the government will be accepting the recommendations of the independent peer review bodies. She explained that doing so incurs an additional in-year cost of some £9 billion, and the department will be tasked with savings of up to £3 billion. Can she outline whether she anticipates they'll have to cover the entire cost of the peer review recommendations, or does she anticipate the Treasury will need to make available additional funds to make up the shortfall?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. We have asked departments to absorb £3.2 billion worth of the pressures. That will be different based on different departments. We know that in health and education, for example, it will be harder to absorb those pay pressures given the huge challenges that health and education face. So it will be different by different departments, and we will be setting that out in the written ministerial statements from the relevant Secretaries of State.
Dr Zubair Ahmed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend, the Chancellor, for coming to this House and outlining the difficult decisions that she has had to take on behalf of us all. Decisions she would not have had to take were it not for the opaque fiscal negligence of the party opposite. Can she reassure me that a Labour government will also always protect the vulnerable, and that under a Labour government, pensioners in this country will still be over £1,600 better off per year by the end of this Parliament?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and we were determined to protect the most vulnerable, which is why we made the decision to ensure that winter fuel payment would still be paid to the poorest pensioners on pension credit. But more than that, we will work with local government and with charities to increase the take-up of pension credit so that everybody who deserves the pension credit gets it, and with it, the winter fuel payment.
Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We all remember Gordon Brown's raid on pensions, and it has taken just 3 weeks for Labour to revert to type, and it is pensioners who are suffering most. Martin Lewis has already criticised the decision online. However, when it comes to these estimates, the Honourable Lady cannot claim that when permanent secretaries were signing off these estimates over the weekend, I assume, that they didn't know about these supposed holes. So if so, and they did sign them off with holes in it, it'd be a breach of their legal duties. So we should be investigating them, or we should be apologising to them for throwing them under the bus today.
Instead of blaming civil servants, the honourable lady should blame the people who are really responsible, and that is the previous government. The country did the right thing, kicking them out 3 weeks ago. They never deserve to get their hands on power again.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. During the last Parliament, the government paid substantial amounts to the train operating companies to make good the losses during a prolonged period of industrial dispute, causing mayhem, causing chaos to the general public. At the same time, the train operating companies paid huge dividends. They also paid the executives massive increases in bonuses. Can my right honourable friend say how much this actually cost the British taxpayer, and can she ensure that this never, ever, ever happens again?
Yes, on page 5 of the Fixing the Foundation documents that we published today, it sets out the pressures on public spending on rail services, pressures that have emerged on rail finances, primarily due to weaker than expected recovery in passenger demand, as well as the cost of industrial action, has led to a pressure of £1.6 billion in this financial year alone.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, and I'd also like to welcome Madam Deputy Speaker to her chair. Much of what the Chancellor says I welcome. No fresh income tax, national insurance, the VAT. But I'm sure the Chancellor will recognise the concern that many pensioners, particularly in the coldest areas of the country, will be feeling at her announcement of the withdrawal of winter fuel payments. And although she's saying that she will work on, bringing more people forward, encouraging people to sign up for credits, can she tell us how she's going to do that if she's also going to cut the government communications budget?
Well, thank the Honourable Lady for that question. There's a couple of things that we're committed to do. First of all, a pension credit and housing benefit are due to be amalgamated. The previous government put that back. We will bring that forward. And we know that take-up of pension credit will increase when it is merged with housing benefit. That will make an impact in terms of ensuring that people get the money that they are entitled to. But we've also committed, as elderly people's charities have asked,